November 11, 1944. Admiral Ozawa stood on the bridge of his flagship, scanning the horizon through his binoculars. What he saw made his hands tremble. Not 4 carriers, not 10, 17 American aircraft carriers stretching across the Philippine Sea. His aide later recalled, "The admiral went completely silent. Then he said just 5 words. We cannot win this war." The Japanese Navy had built its entire doctrine around carrier warfare. They'd struck Pearl Harbor with 6 carriers, destroyed the British Eastern Fleet with 5. For 3 years, they believed numerical parity was achievable, that Japan's industrial might, combined with warrior spirit, could match American production. They were catastrophically wrong. When Admiral Takeo Kurita first received reconnaissance reports in October 1944, he thought the numbers were a mistake. The scout plane reported seeing numerous carrier groups approaching the Philippines. Kurita demanded confirmation. The scout returned with photographs: 18 American carriers, fast carriers, fleet carriers, light carriers, an armada so vast it covered 30 miles of ocean. Kurita's chief of staff remembered his commander's reaction. He didn't speak for 20 minutes. He just stared at the photographs. Then he whispered, "They're building them faster than we can sink them." This wasn't an exaggeration. This was mathematical reality crystallizing into despair. In December 1941, the United States had 7 fleet carriers. 3 years later, over 100 carriers of all types. Japan started the war with 10. By late 1944, they had 4 operational carriers left, and almost no pilots who could land on them. Admiral Ozawa commanded Japan's last carrier force at the Battle of Leyte Gulf. His 4 carriers carried just 108 aircraft. Many pilots had less than 6 months training. Some had never landed on a carrier at night. Several couldn't land on a carrier at all. Across from him, 17 American carriers with over 1,000 aircraft. Pilots with 2 years of training. Veterans with 50 missions. An air group so large it could rotate squadrons and still maintain continuous combat operations. Ozawa knew his mission before he left port. He wasn't trying to win. He was trying to die gloriously enough that his sacrifice might delay the inevitable by a few weeks. His executive officer documented their final planning meeting. "The admiral said we were bait. We would lure the American carriers away from the invasion beaches. We would not return. No one protested. What could we say? He was right. But even knowing they were bait, even accepting death, the actual sight of the American fleet broke something in these men. Theory became reality. Abstractions became steel and aircraft. You can accept dying for your country," one staff officer wrote in his diary. "But when you see the enemy's strength is 10 times yours, 20 times yours, you realize your death accomplishes nothing. You're not even a speed bump. You're a rounding error." Admiral Takagi watched the American carriers through his periscope on October 24th. He was commanding a submarine, desperately trying to find an angle to attack, but the American formation was perfect. Destroyers in outer screen, cruisers in middle layer, carriers in the protected center, always moving, never predictable. "I counted 17 carriers," he reported after the war. "Then I counted again. Still 17. I thought perhaps I was seeing the same ships twice as the formation turned, so I waited 2 hours and counted again. 19. More had arrived. He fired his torpedoes at maximum range. All missed. The destroyers detected his submarine and forced him deep. He spent 14 hours evading depth charges. When he finally surfaced after dark, the American fleet had vanished over the horizon. I felt relief," he admitted decades later. Relief that I had failed. Because if I had succeeded, if I had sunk 1 carrier, 16 would remain. And tomorrow, 18 would come. This is when I knew. We were fighting a country that could afford to lose. We were a country that couldn't afford to exist. This realization rippled through the combined fleet. In private conversations, in whispered conferences, in carefully worded reports that said everything by saying nothing. Our position is challenging became code for "we're going to lose." The enemy's industrial capacity exceeds estimates meant they're building a fleet every month. Pilots are showing great spirit despite circumstances. Translated to, "Our men are dying in obsolete aircraft against overwhelming odds." The most devastating accounts came after the war, when Japanese officers finally spoke freely. Without censors. Without fear of being accused of defeatism. Admiral Ugaki Matome, who commanded battleships at Leyte Gulf, wrote in his diary, "Each American carrier has more aircraft than our entire Air Force in this region. They operate 3 shifts. Their pilots are fresh. Ours are exhausted. They have fuel. We're rationing drops. They have replacement aircraft arriving daily. We're cannibalizing broken planes to keep one flying. This isn't war. This is mathematics. We've already lost. We're just counting the days until the equation resolves." Captain Ome Toshikazu, operations officer for the mobile fleet, was more direct. "When we saw the reconnaissance photos of 18 carriers, we stopped pretending." One of my fellow officers said, "We planned to fight America for 6 months. It's been 3 years. They have 20 times more ships than when we started. We have half as many. The war is over. We're just deciding how many men to waste before admitting it." But perhaps the most chilling statement came from Admiral Yamamoto's former aide, speaking in 1946. The admiral predicted this. Before Pearl Harbor, he said we could run wild for 6 months to a year. After that, he had no confidence. We thought he was being humble. He was being precise. He'd seen American factories, he knew what was coming, and he died before he had to watch his predictions come true. Perhaps that was mercy. Admiral Ozawa's decoy mission succeeded. His 4 carriers lured Halsey's fleet away from the invasion beaches. His ships were destroyed. Over 1,000 Japanese sailors died. The invasion force landed anyway. Ozawa survived. He was rescued from the water after his flagship sank. He lived to see the end of the war, lived to see the occupation, lived to give testimony about what he witnessed in those final months. In 1960, an American naval historian asked him, "When did you know Japan would lose the war?" Ozawa didn't hesitate. November 11, 1944. "The moment I counted 17 carriers and realized more were coming." You can't fight a country that builds carriers faster than you can train pilots. You can't sink a fleet that regenerates overnight. You can't win a war where the enemy treats losses as acceptable costs, and you treat losses as existential catastrophes. The historian pressed, "But you kept fighting for 9 more months." "We kept dying for 9 more months," Ozawa corrected. Fighting implies you have a chance. Other Japanese admirals echoed this timeline. The moment they saw America's true industrial power wasn't when they read reports or studied intelligence estimates. It was when they stood on bridges and counted carriers until they ran out of numbers. When the horizon filled with ships and they realized this was just one task force, one fleet, one fraction of American naval power. Admiral Kurita, who commanded the center force at Leyte Gulf, said it plainly in his post-war memoir. "We fought Pearl Harbor with confidence. We fought Midway with hope. We fought Guadalcanal with determination. We fought Leyte Gulf with acceptance. By the time we saw those carriers in the Philippines, we weren't trying to win. We were trying to die well enough that history might remember us as brave rather than foolish." The final word belongs to Admiral Ozawa's chief of staff, who wrote in 1948, "People ask what broke Japanese morale. Was it the atomic bombs, the fire raids, the submarine blockade? No, it was simpler than that. It was the day we looked at the horizon and counted enemy carriers until we lost count. It was the moment we realized that even if we sank half their fleet, they'd have more ships next month than we started the war with. That's when morale didn't break, it evaporated. Because you can't maintain fighting spirit when mathematics proves your defeat." November 11, 1944. An admiral counted 17 carriers and spoke 5 words that defined Japan's future. "We cannot win this war." He was right. He'd been right for 3 years. He just hadn't seen the proof until that moment. Some truths you don't understand until they're parked on the horizon, stretching 30 miles in every direction, carrying 1,000 aircraft and the weight of inevitability.